I'm Matthew James. I'm the President of the Historical Society of the Northern Territory, and I'm your MC tonight. Thank you for coming. Just before we get going, you notice the camera filming the proceedings. If no one's comfortable being filmed, just let us know, and he won't pick you up. So everyone's okay with that? If you need to go to the toilet, there's a toilet up the back of the room there. And if there's a fire, that's the exit. We all go for the exit. So my job really is just to introduce the various speakers today, and I'll get going straight away. So to start the proceedings, we've got Alison Mills here from Larrakia to do a welcome to country. Thank you.
Thank you. I've done, I don't know how many welcomes, thousands I think. It's the first time I've been able to welcome this lady. We go back a long way. Done some really funny things, crazy things, haven't we? But I'm, but you know, she's American, so you know. So anyway, I'm going to welcome. What I do when I do a welcome, for me, it's more about. I love coming to community events, and I love meeting people, and I love mingling and talking, and all the stuff that. It's a very community-minded thing for me when I do the welcome, and I'm welcoming myself and you. I want to, because we're going to meet like never before, never again either. You know, it's always the moment is special, as us here now as humans. You know. And whatever we're doing in our life, whatever our plans are, our program, human program is, I'm pretty sure that we are all, what sits in our mind, I think, is, or one would hope, is that we're all doing this, what we're doing in the moment for the betterment of all people. Society kind of thing, that's how I like to come across. So it's a special moment. So I'm welcoming you, me and you, I'm welcoming us. What we're doing, where we're going, what we're all doing, and I'm welcoming you to my father's country, Larrakia country. Bachelor is my mother's country, and it's the Kungarakan people country. And I believe my uncles mentioned in the book, Speedy McGuinness, yeah, so they were friends, good friends. What's it? He's here. Oh, right, cool. Anyway, so welcome to Larrakia country, welcome to, this is how I like to talk, that we are welcoming ourselves as well in with the country, in with the spirits. And as I said, what we're all doing as humans, as a community. And I must admit, I said to Mary Jane, I said, what are you writing about a zoo for? And then I found out, because she told me only today, because we don't get together that much because you live so far away. But and then when she told me today that there's amazing stories inside the book about Johnny's life and how he related his life and the zoo to his life events. So very interesting book and very interesting. I might even read a book for the first time, you know that? I don't get into books, I'm sorry, but yeah. Here he is. So this is Uncle Speedy, and he's in the book, yeah. And he lives out on our land, on the Kungarakan land. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you. So I'm catching up with you again. Mary Jane.
Thank you for being polite. Oh.
We normally swear at each other. Anyway, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for that. That was great. Before I introduce the next speaker, I'll just quickly give you a quick rundown on the Historical Society's activities. Our core output really is publishing of books, and it's been going on since the late 60s, purely all done by a voluntary committee, which is excellent. So the book we're doing today is just part of that process that we go through, and book publishing, you could say, is our flagship in a sense. That's our main output. A new activity we're looking at is, you can see on this banner over here, is a history in a box, and we've got a little subcommittee of the council which is putting together this this display, which is going to be offered to schools, community groups, and anybody who would like to take it up. And it will come in a box, and it has a banner, it has photographs of the early landing of Goida. This is the first output we're going to do. And there'll be several books written by Territorians within the box as well. And it's just a way that we're trying to introduce the early European history to our curriculum, basically. So, and it's just a fledgling start. And I must put a lot of emphasis, must go to Robin Smith, who's been driving this, which is excellent. So thank you very much, Robin. So the next speaker today is Jerry Wood, and he is to speak and actually launch the book. Thank you, Jerry.
I wonder whether, if I was going to launch a book, whether I just should throw it and that'll be it. But I better not. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank you for Matthew for asking me to launch this book. I feel it's a privilege, actually. Also welcome Thomas. Hadn't met him before. You'll find him in the book with a big barramundi, so should be able to recognise him. He's up the back there. I suppose I was thinking about this book. I've been reading it in and out of between question time and debates in Parliament all this week. I wanted to read it as close to the day as possible so it was still fresh in my mind. I thought to myself that if this was fiction, this would be what you'd call a rollicking yarn. But the thing is, it's not fiction, it's about a real person. And it's a great book. And Mary Jane, you should be proud of what you've written. It's a book that once you start reading it, it's easy to read. I don't say that simplistically, but it encourages to read on. And in some books you can get through the first couple of pages and go, oh, this is too hard. Not this book. Every time you open a chapter, you've got a new insight into someone or to something. There is so much in here. I lived on the Daly River on and off from the early 70s and went to Bathurst Island, then back to Daly River in the early 80s. And I used to travel to Batchelor quite often because some of my family lived there from time to time. And I went past that zoo, and I went past that zoo. And I looked at it, and I went past that zoo. And probably a lot of other people did at time to time. They didn't understand what it was about and probably just thought it was a bit of junk. And it was just some person that was a bit eccentric, and that's all I thought of. And looking at it through this book now, and being a book, and the famous saying, don't judge a book by its cover, I don't think you should be judging Gene Merkins by his cover either, and that's what's so great about this book. It's a book with, it's got a great tragedy, it's got, it's real, because it's about a real person with all his faults and with his background. With that, when you go through this book, you realise what a lot of his background, how it, spending 2.5 years in a concentration camp, affected the rest of his life. So regardless of what all his faults, you might say, you can put it that way, or his eccentricities or whatever, he had part of his life which obviously it never left him and would have obviously affected everything he did from then on. He was certainly a hard-working person, there's no doubt about that, as Thomas would probably tell you, because in the book that Thomas says he didn't get much time to play with the other boys at school. He was going home feeding animals in Tirana Street. There's also some great characters in there, and I suppose the thing I like about this book, a lot of those characters are still alive today. A lot of those characters have passed on. and you get a different sort of view of some of those characters, because I know a lot of the people that have been written in here. Yeah, I don't know whether any of those characters have turned up today too much, but some are seen in a different light than maybe I've seen them. So that's part of the beauty of this book. There are characters here that many of you who've lived around the territory for a while would recognise. There's politicians. They come in all sizes and all versions according to this book, some for, some against, some helped, some didn't. And there's many friends in Bachelor that helped, and there's other people in Bachelor that thought he was a bit weird. So you get all these different characters. That makes it such a great story to read. You know, it's not just A to B to C and that's the end of the book. A lot of it, and there's chapters there where there's a little bit on the top, and sometimes it refers back to reflections in the concentration camp, just to remind you where he came from and what he went through, and just keeps you focused on the person that he was and the tragedies of losing people. And it talks about his love of women. Now, you know, whether you liked it or not, and he collected some undies and things and he liked women, but you sort of, I was thinking today when I was coming here, but was he looking for something through all the darkness he'd been through? Couldn't you blame him for that? Was he looking for some companionship, some love, some of that, basically some love from a woman? And he struggled with that for a fair bit of his life. So, you know, it's a real story about a real person. You know, we talk about the bureaucracy, and I mean, I work within the bureaucracy, and I have some sympathy for what happened when they took away all these animals. Now, whether you agreed, whether you thought some of the animals were probably kept not the way they should have been or not, but it seemed to me extremely harsh for a person that worked for so long, for so little money, could get no help, for the government to spend money on places like the crocodile farm, which went broke. They spent money on the wildlife park, and I haven't got anything against the wildlife park, but for a person that did something from scratch and got no help at all, and then they were all taken away from him. That's hard. Yeah. So it is a beautiful book. For me, I enjoyed every bit of it. It's got a great index. You'll see all the characters. You only have to go back to the index and you'll see a lot of the history. Speedy Guinness is here. You saw him come in somewhere? He's up there. I'm looking for the bald head. Yeah, that's him, yes. Yeah. That's right, I know. And Speedy gets there's a good part of a chapter that talks about what Speedy thought, and he knew Jean well. And I do remember the ute with Johnny Zoo written on the back of it, if nothing else, because that was fairly prominent around either Darwin or Bachelor. You'd see it, you couldn't miss it really. And some of his belief in the ALP used to be up the front. You couldn't miss that either when the elections were on. And yeah, but it was interesting, you know, Terry McCarthy was not a Labor man by any means, but at least he wrote something in support of Johnny, and maybe that reflects the way the territory was then. Regardless of who you voted for and that, we were all Territorians. A lot of us didn't have a lot of money. A lot of us battled. A lot of people in Bachelor certainly were not rich people. And so this book reflects not only Jean's life, but also a fair bit about Bachelor at that time, the characters in Bachelor. What's the name? I'm just trying to think of the ex-president of the council, Wendy Leach. I've known for a long time. She's mentioned in there. There are other people who do quotations from there. So for me, it brought back memories as well of people I know, people who are still around, and people who have passed on, not necessarily died, but moved elsewhere. So I recommend, if you want a book that is really enjoyable, and with Christmas coming up, and if you really love Northern Territory history, and what a better place to launch this book. This is a book that I think not only would you love, but you'll have second thoughts about what you thought about Buffalo Johnny. As someone said in here, they thought he was a whacker. I probably thought he was strange. But you might have a second opinion after you've read this and have a change of thought about a man that did battle all his life, through thick and thin, through ups and downs. He might have had his faults, as he said. I think some of the women might have said he was a violent man at some times. He drank a lot. But, you know, he's a human being that went through 2.5 years in a concentration camp. How can any of us who have never been through that sort of judge a man and say he was strange? He was a human being He came to Australia, he worked hard, he died here, a true Territorian. Enjoy the book, Mary Jane. You've done this man proud. Thank you very much. And that was okay. And that was a virtual launch. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. That was excellent. The next speaker is the author herself, Mary Jane Overall, and please make her feel very welcome to the lectern.
First of all, I hope everybody's seated because I see people, there's some chairs around here. I'm going to try to keep my talk short, but I do want to say that this book is, well, yes, it was written by me, but the truth is it's the culmination and the putting together of all of the interviews that I did of Territorians that actually made it a very special history of the Territory. And basically what happened was, as far as how this book came about, was Jackie and Fleet and I, Jackie's in the audience, we had decided we would go out bush and we'd go find, have a look at Litchfield Park. And we went in, we saw Johnny's Zoo, and we visited and we met Johnny, and he told us all of these stories about the zoo, and we were like very infatuated. And I went back into town, and somebody from SBS took me out to dinner and said, I have this money for people to do a documentary about something in the Territory. And I met Jackie later on, and I'm like, hey, man, we're like, yes, we have it. We do. We've got it. We know. Here's our script right here, which you're welcome to look at. We spent a ton of time going through papers and newspapers, interviewing people, et cetera, et cetera. We were rejected a few times. We couldn't access a lot of papers from the Conservation Commission. We weren't sure why. We later, after studying a little bit more about Johnny, we found out why. But anyway, so we put together this script, handed it in, thought, yes, we get the money, yay. We were rejected. We were kind of like, wow. And then years later, I realized that, you know, there were probably a lot of political reasons for that, because Johnny's Zoo had been closed by the Conservation Commission. He sued the Conservation Commission, and there was a lot of kerfuffle about the place itself and how he wasn't caring for the animals properly, etc. So anyway, I thought briefly, and I'll try to keep this short, tell you a little bit about Johnny himself. First of all, he was born in Belgium, in Yale, in April 15th, 1922. And he lived sort of on a farm with his parents. When he got a bit older, he joined the Resistance. Which was the Wit Brigade in Belgium. And he, actually, I should turn my phone off too. He joined the Resistance, and then when he was in the Resistance, he got out of the, oh wait, she's, okay. Down to the Resistance man, boop. There he is. All right, so anyway, he was in the Wit Brigade. When he got out, he needed to help support his family. So he went to work for Junkers. So he worked for Junkers Airplane Factory. And while he was there working, earning money for his family, there were prisoners from Buchenwald that were working there. And so Johnny became sort of a letter embezzler. He would take letters, he would mail the letters of the prisoners to his family and bring the letters from their families back to them at Junkers. He got dobbed in by a fellow Belgian, and he was then put into his first concentration camp, into a concentration camp where he stayed for 2.5 years. And so when he got out of the concentration camp, that was one of them, that's Auschwitz. He spent a lot of time in Buchenwald. He went to a few different ones. When he got out of the concentration camp, he married his first wife and he started studying painting. He got high distinctions in painting, and he did quite a bit of work in these pieces. A lot of these pieces are in the museum now, the NT Museum of Art. He then, after a while, he got divorced from his first wife, and he decided, okay, I'm going to go travel. And so he started traveling. He wound up in Africa with Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer was a man, some of you may know, a philosopher, Nobel Peace Prize winner. He had this huge leprosarium where Johnny stayed, but he also had animals running all around because the natives would come in and trade animals for medical help. So that's where he got his idea. I want to have a zoo of my own. So when he returned from Belgium, he got married to a German woman and had adopted his son, Thomas, who is here, and they migrated to Australia, and they wound up in Bachelor, in their first home. And so Johnny, wanting to start a zoo, started collecting animals everywhere until he got about 160 animals in his backyard. And the neighbors were like, you know, one of them said, I think a python swallowed my cat or something. They're like, wait a minute. So Johnny starts, and Thomas, there's some great things that Thomas tells, explaining what it's like to have 160 animals in your backyard, and later working at the real zoo, as well as Ralph Werkner, who has a hysterical story about when he was sort of examining this snapping turtle that catches onto his bottom lip, and Thomas tells him, well, you just gotta wait until it lets go, you know. And then Ralph also has an amazing story about when he returns to the zoo after the zoo's been closed, and what happens. It's a very precious story. So anyway, Johnny's got all these animals in the back of the zoo. The back of in his backyard. And finally, the government says, listen, we found a place for you, Territory Enterprise, and they said, we're going to give you this block of land, you can lease this. And he goes, great. And so they give it to him. Well, it happened to be an old army base where all of these army things, you know, bombs, as you can see there, and missiles were on the property, and Johnny goes, great, I'll just use that to build my zoo. So he starts building this amazing thing. You can see the missiles that, the missiles that's a sculpture that he did. I mean, it's just amazing, some of the stuff that he did on his property. Not only that, he and his friends, not only did they build the zoo, or sort of help him build the zoo, he did a lot of it by hand, but they also trapped all of the animals. And Lyle Johnson has a wonderful sort of description of how you can go about getting goannas and quolls, or even crocodiles if you feel like it. Long before Steve Irwin was doing that kind of work, they were catching these animals by themselves and for the zoo. So finally, he gets this little place built, and it was on Easter Sunday, 1970, that Colin Jack Hinton came with Johnny and opened Johnny's Zoo. And a lot of people came, and according to Douglas Berry's the Heart of Rum Jungle, over a 10-year period, there were about 50,000 people that visited the place, which is amazing. There is a story by Anik Bedouin that she describes a visit to the zoo that she had with her Casuarina High School and they went to visit the zoo, and how it was very beneficial for the students to actually see the flora and fauna in real life. And the zoo was quite a beautiful place, according to her description. So there were a lot of people that loved the zoo, but then Johnny himself was a little bit of a difficult person to deal with. You know, he would yell and scream, and he was Belgian. People couldn't really understand him. And a lot of people would sort of attack the zoo, and they would let the animals out or kill them. There was, however, one person that understood Johnny, or from what I gathered, or from my interviews, and that was Speedy McGinnis. And Speedy McGinnis's description of meeting Johnny on the road, he saw Johnny roaming down the road, sort of burning off the brush here and there, and he went down and he stopped in front of Johnny, and he goes, "Hey, listen, he told him to stop burning. He said, "This is blackfellow land now, and you're buggering it up." To which Johnny responded, "Blackfellas? I'll shoot you bastards." Well, Speedy and Johnny became kind of friends, and if Speedy would pick him up on the road, and Johnny would sort of gibber at him, and he didn't really understand him, and Speedy would gibber back at him. But the important thing to me was the fact that out of all the people I interviewed, Speedy seemed to really understand the horror or the psychological trauma that he had gone through having been a Holocaust survivor, because, you know, he sort of related it to his own people, to the Aboriginal people. So I found that really quite touching. 1974, of course, was Cyclone Tracy. The whole place was obliterated. Darwin, Adina Poole, and her husband Peter's story about what it's like to sort of go to bed and you've got a house and then you wake up and there's nothing at all is quite sort of shocking. What a lot of people experienced in Darwin. The town was evacuated. Of course, nobody was about to visit a zoo out in Bachelor. I mean, who's going to visit a zoo? They also got a new head of the RSPCA, Robin Leslie. She was a devout animal person, and she heard a lot of complaints about Johnny Zoo because he was having difficulty feeding the animals. And he went to the government on more than one occasion asking Marshall Perrin, "Please, could you at least give me $50 so that I can take care of the animals?" He was feeding them roadkill, doing everything that he could to actually feed these animals. So, but he was rejected continuously by the government. There was, however, an article that came out calling, two reporters went into the zoo. This is at the end of the life of the zoo. They went in there posing as just visitors, and they wrote a huge article about the zoo, calling it the zoo of shame. And this infuriated Johnny, and he decided, okay, I'm getting the RSPCA, Conservation Commission, Jack Doolan, the MLA of Victoria River, and we're going to have a look and find out exactly what needs to be done to make this zoo a better place. They came down and had a look, and on September 20th, 1982, Johnny was awarded a pass to be able to keep his animals for another year. So, but the vandalism did not stop. And at one stage, some people went into the zoo, they robbed took away all these animals. The person was caught, but they were ordered to take them to the Yarrawonga Zoo. And I guess the worst tragedy to me that happened at the zoo was during the BTEC movement, when the government was trying to sort of weed out a lot of the feral animals. They were dropping 1080 pellets down that poisoned buffalo. And one night Johnny heard planes overhead, and the next day 26 of his buffalo were dying, or dead or dying. So that was pretty traumatic for Johnny. Anyway, it became very clear that he wasn't able to really look after his animals in the proper way. There were still a lot of complaints. And on May 12, 1983, Robert Fox told his team from the Conservation Commission to go in and remove all of the animals and close the zoo once and for all. So that was a day, quite a tragic day for Johnny. Of course, the entire town was very upset about this. Bernie Havlick, some of you may know, the man that built that great big castle that was on the roundabout down in Bachelor. He came to his defense, as did Ted Roberts, who managed to get him some legal aid. Johnny hired John Waters to fight his case against the Conservation Commission to at least get some compensation for the destruction of his property. And in the end, Johnny did win that case. So that's basically a brief, quick story, but I do want to add one other thing. While I was reading this book, I was struck by something very bizarre. One, he seems to be have a form of Stockholm syndrome or survivor's guilt, whereby the person that's been in the Holocaust sort of relives or recreates or identifies with their captors. And I say that Johnny seemed to demonstrate a few of these symptoms. First of all, when he got out of when he returned to Belgium, he married a German woman, adopted her German son, which that seems pretty normal, except his family was like, why would you ever marry a German? You've been in the Holocaust, you know. And so that seemed a little bit bizarre. But then when I was looking at the work that Johnny put in with by himself, single-handedly, sometimes even digging with a shovel, the billabong for the buffalo, you know, I thought, that's a guy that really knows how to work. He learned a lot when he was in those concentration camps, you know. He was kind of obsessed with that. But then I find out his best friend that lived there and helped him for 7 years until he was killed by a hit and run. His name was Mike Sedgeville, and he was German, and they were best friends. Well, then I'm looking through pictures, and I find a picture of his best friend in a Nazi outfit. I'm like, you know what? This is really strange. And so then, after that, Johnny gave his best friend a place to live. It was sort of a bunker-like thing that created during the mining era. And so Johnny said, yep, Mike, I've got a place for you to live. It's the bunker. And everybody knew about the bunker and laughed, ha, ha, ha. Till I read about Buchenwald. The left-hand side of Buchenwald is called the bunker, where the most hated prisoners were kept. So I'm like, you know what? This is even more bizarre than I thought it was. So, and finally, the pièce de résistance is when I sort of compared the zoo to Buchenwald. You know, the arches that you go under, the way it's outlined, you see? Up on the right, you can see how it's sort of reflective. I mean, he was using whatever materials he had to make his art museum. And so, yeah, I just thought, yes, that could be something that Johnny was experiencing. So, and as far as the t-shirts that were made by my friend Jackie Fleet and that we're selling, better rooting than shooting, that was a saying that Johnny had over his bed. Actually, it was probably meant to be talking about his love of women, because you can see the little underpants on either side of the pillow. But basically reminding us to make love, not war, because really, it is a lot better rooting than it is shooting. So that's it. Thank you so much to all the people that contributed. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions for any of the people here, there are people, you know, like Speedy, like Anik, like, well, there are just a few people, Jackie. All right, anyway, thank you again.
Thank you to Mary Jane Overton. Excellent. Overall. Is that yours? That sort of wraps up proceedings for the day. Feel free to hang around and. Sorry. Sorry. Introduce the next speaker, and that's Jackie Fleet.
That's okay. Anyway, I almost got away with it. So I've just got a short one, really. And I'd firstly like to thank Mary Jane, you know, for her sterling effort in completing this book after all this time, to pick it back up and finish it. That's a labour of love, you know. And so I'd also like to thank everybody that agreed to talk to me. Like I did a lot of the research for Mary Jane back in the day after, you know, SBS had approached Mary Jane. It was on, basically. And so I did a lot of the library research. I went to the archives. I was a researcher there. I went to some really strange government libraries where I was found out that I thought it was 99 years, but you know, that's in my mind, it was a very long time. If it was 30 years, it felt like 99, you know, that you can't look at Johnny's files for. So, and in all that researching, I think I became aware also at that time about the government interest in wildlife, that they'd realised it was a big draw card for the Territory for people to come along and, you know, see wildlife. So at the same time as Johnny Zoo was winding down, the wildlife park was winding up, sort of thing. There was this sort of synchronicity thing going on. But so anyway, Mary Jane wanted me to talk and I didn't want to, but here I am. So yeah. So, yeah, and after that, after Mary Jane left, you know, she went back to America and I'd done a lot of research. I'd got to know a lot about Johnny personally, you know, and in all of that I think you feel, you know, you start to feel a little responsible for them, you know, like in a way, because we were doing what was going to be a film and then ended up being a book. So I used to go down and visit Johnny sometimes, and I'd take him a little bit of oxtail because I believe that's what he liked. And I also got to meet Thomas and have an interview with Thomas, which I found was really insightful, really amazing, you know, because Johnny, when he'd talk, I mean, I think, and I've diverted from this, but when Johnny would talk, I think he would slip in and out of lucid reality, wouldn't he, you know, for a little bit there. So in some ways, like when we met him that time that we were going to Litchfield, one of the things that really stuck in our mind, I think, was, you know, the fact that he told us he'd been in concentration camp, came out 47 kilos, and the story about the buffalo, you know, which he'd said, you know, had happened in the middle of the night, for example, and I think that's in our research. We realised that the BTEC program was going on around those times, so very hard to determine the truth in those situations, but, you know, it all coincided, so there's probably some real, you know, truth there. Anyway, so basically then after that, you know, I went down to visit him one time and he said that a couple of people had come along and made him sign something. And, you know, we looked around at things and I don't know, we just had a little talk. But next time, he'd actually been taken off. He'd been made a ward of estate again, basically, and put into an old people's home. So at the end of his life, you know, I mean, there he was living on his block of land with no power, no water running, you know, there by himself, the roof falling down, being held up by a pole, you know. And he lived there right up until then, until he got taken off his land. And then he got put into Palmerston, into the old people's home there. And so then I used to go visit him sometimes, and I'd take my dog and take him for a little walk around the streets. And so I remember one time he needed to go to the toilet. So we walked into what was then the Hilton, me, my dog and Johnny, and I asked if he could go to the toilet. I didn't even realise I had the dog with me, but they were really gracious and they let Johnny go to the loo and they didn't worry about the dog. And, you know, and but every time I left him at the old people's home, it was the most distressing thing because he wouldn't let me out of his sight. He'd be like trying to, you know, follow me, take me back to my land, please take me back to my land. And I've got to say that was the hardest thing. Once I took him home for dinner with my kids and stuff, and then I had to take him back to the old people's home. And he said to me, you put a bed there, you put a bed there, and I won't touch you, you know. And then, you know, his hair was still really thick. I'd go visit him at the old people's home and they're doing his hair, and he'd had a few falls, for example. So then he got put out to the Palmerston old people's home. And at that point then, I couldn't take him out anymore for any more walks, and plus he deteriorated a little more. And there he is, but he was still quite lucid. And as he said to me, I wanted a lot more, you know. So I think he would have loved to have been taken home with somebody, to have been given a home, you know. And at the end of his life, he became a prisoner, just like he was in the war. So it was extremely, extremely sad. And we met Gabby and Edmund, that's Buffalo Johnny's brother and stuff, and they seemed to be coming out then thereafter. And so after they were actually here And when they flew back that day, I think it was that day or the very next day, he died. He died whilst they were in transit on the way back to Belgium. So they came straight back. And they got me to go with them to the public trustees because my English is better. And they asked me if I wouldn't mind doing the eulogy, which I did. So the last time I saw Buffalo Johnny was in his coffin along with Edmund and Gabby. And for me, a man that had had such a hard life, you know, he'd struggled all his life, and to see him in his coffin, he had the ultimate look of peace on his face, and I've got to tell you, that is one of the most reassuring things I've ever seen. Yeah, because I think, you know, in death there's peace, and it makes me believe in there's something greater. Apart from the fact that I might have believed that anyway, but it just reinforces that, you know. So I think I was privileged to know Johnny at the time. I think we all were. There's a slice of history that Mary Jane has preserved for you all, and thank you. Yeah. That's okay.
Thank you to Jackie. And I apologise, Mary Jane, for my blooper there, sorry.
That's quite all right. Marijuana.
Now we've got a... we've got a Richard, I believe, is that correct? Luxton has brought in an original painting. We might...
No, sorry, I did forget. Through Dana Murray, who was one of the curators that I knew at the time.
Okay, thank you. And we're just... Yeah, it might be better up on the table there.
Yeah, you don't want to get food on it, do we?
I'm just a man. We're not going to eat off it. They can see.
There's a bit of a story behind this painting. Bushfires Council used to have a fire break around Johnny's block, and it was wild country outside that. And one year the bushfires people, there was a bit of a break there, and they didn't hear a burn. Senderies from the helicopter. There was a little bit more wind than they expected, and they perfectly burned out Johnny's block, leaving the surrounding bushland absolutely untouched. And from that day on, Johnny would always come along to the annual general meeting of the Bachelor Adelaide River Tortilla Bushfire Brigade and get up during the meeting and remind the bushfires people of the day they got it wrong and burned him out instead of the bush. And the bushfires people would say, "Oh, here's Johnny again. Well, hope he'll go away." And Johnny would sit down and that was that. But he made the point that they'd got it wrong on at least one occasion by burning his block out. For quite a few years, the bushfires people down there, we had a fun day auction sale of bits and pieces as a fundraiser for the Bart Brigade. Anyone who comes from Bachelor will have heard about Bart. And a couple of the things that had come up for auction would be things like wicking cartoons of bushfire fighting and this painting. And it quite fascinated me, not knowing Johnny personally, but knowing of him and the story of him. And here was one of his paintings, and I proudly paid quite a bit of money to get the painting, and I've hung on to it ever since. It's about due to get a new frame around it, but it's a Buffalo Johnny original, and there are two little brass plaques on it giving the story of the painting. But he really was a character, and not a bloke to fear or anything. He was himself. Just a delightful guy, and yep, he'd even copped a hiding from bureaucracy up here with people wanting to tell him how to run his zoo. But yeah, amazing guy. Anyway, enjoy it and have a look.
Thanks, Christian.
Anybody else wants to tell a story about Johnny?
So we just got some people telling stories.
My name's Doug Alsop, and in 2000 my partner Colleen and I moved to Bachelor, and I just want to mention two brief encounters that I had with Johnny. The first one, after we'd moved there, we were looking for a block to buy, and so one thing led to another. So I went out and talked to Johnny this day, and I won't tell you the conversation, but he showed me around, and the bed brought back memories. But basically he wanted Colleen and I just to live on one half of the block, and he'd live on the other half, and everything could be hunky-dory. And when I said, what about titles or, you know, he said, this paperwork, he said, that's for wiping your ass on. Okay. So basically that's how that conversation went, but I didn't go ahead with it. And the next occasion was I met him outside the Bachelor Health Clinic, and it was about 3 days prior to the NT elections in 2001. I think it was 2001 when Labor won the election for the first time. So it was about 3 days prior to that. So the clinic wasn't open when Johnny was at the clinic sitting outside, and I rocked up and we were having a conversation. And about nothing. And then when the nurse opened the door and Johnny went inside, I said to the nurse that Johnny's after some sedatives for Saturday night. And he swung around and turned to me. He said, I think she'll win. I said, oh, bullshit, Johnny. She's got no chance. It's a 2-horse race. He said, no, no, no. And he raved on, and we sat in the waiting room. He said, I think she'll win. I think she'll win. Well, needless to say, I dodged Johnny after Saturday because she did win. And, yeah, they were just the two occasions. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that we see people who, in the Territory, who are, let's describe them as characters. I find that we should, even though our political differences between Johnny and I were poles apart, we should just respect them, because when they're gone, and they don't come back, and we lose them, and I think they're a great loss. Thank you.
Anyone else? Like, you've got a little personal tidbit for us? No? I personally have spent my childhood in the top end in the 60s and the 70s, travelling past Johnny Zoo on the way to Bachelor a lot for school camps and whatnot. And then between the 80s and the 90s, we actually owned a small cattle station just outside of Bachelor called Cameron Downs, which we turned into a rambutan orchard, actually. So we had a few interactions with Johnny. They were all positive, not negative. The Rum Jungle Recreation Club, a bit of intermixing there. Just thought I'd throw that into the fray. I got a bit of background there. So we spent 20 years on the land at Bachelor. And one thing I did notice for the Bachelor area, it did attract a certain type of character. We found a lot of people hermit living in the bush out there, and generally European type people who just love the bush and setting up a camp near a river and away they go type thing. So yeah, maybe it's the Bachelor thing, the Rum Jungle thing, who knows. Anyway, that wraps up proceedings, unless the author has any more to add. And we've got some treats to have and some drinks, so please feel free to mingle and have a drink and something to eat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.